Welcome to the podcast. Thanks very much, first of all, for joining us here at Goodwood on a sadly rather rainy weekend, but a good weekend all the same. Look, we always start our conversations in the same way on high performance, which is, for you, what represents high performance?
So you always start it deep and meaningful.
Yeah, always. That's where we go.
That. As we have a screaming racing car going by behind. Well, it's a really good question. What is high performance? You know, I've been around sport since I was 8 years old, motor racing. I've also been around triathlons and Ironman and things like that. So I have a very different view because I've been around different sports. But for me in motor racing, it was always trying to find the edge. My natural ability was good when it came to driving. My natural skill that I was given by my parents was good, but it probably wasn't as good as some. So for me, high performance, it was about fine-tuning myself, finding a way to have a better performance than others. So I personally feel that I worked harder than a lot of guys did in motor racing and in Formula One. I don't have the God-given talent of a Lewis Hamilton, for example, but I could beat him because I would work in certain areas, whether it was set up with the car, the engineering side of things, the strategy, many different areas I would perform better because I worked harder. And that was my strength. I would spend a lot of time with the team developing the car, but also getting the team behind me as an individual to support me more in the team. And you could say that's dirty tactics, but it's not. It's sport. You do whatever you can to win within the regulations.
Yeah.
So for me, high performance was extracting the maximum out of me every way possible. And whether that was my fitness level, my nutrition, obviously learning as much as I could in terms of driver ability, but also the engineering side of Formula One. So it was perfecting the areas I knew I could make myself better in, whereas the God-given talent, I couldn't. That is what you're given.
It also sounds as though you understood the power of communication as well, because I think, I worked alongside you for a long time, and I would just watch the driving and comment on the driving. Things like working with the engineers, working with the team to understand them, to get them to understand you and be on side, if you like. Where did you develop those skills, and what did you find was effective when you went into a new team to make that team work for you?
My dad.
Really? Was it?
It was the team of people that I had around me, lucky to have on side. We came into McLaren, for example, after winning the World Championship in 2009. People said it was the craziest move to McLaren alongside Lewis Hamilton. And even Ross Brawn said that. I told the team that I was leaving at the end of 2009. I spoke to Nick Fry, who basically just shouted at me. I remember going in his office. He was one of the bosses alongside Ross Brawn at the time. And I remember going in his office and telling him I was leaving. Yeah. And he just shouted at me.
No.
And I basically started laughing because it was a really uncomfortable situation. I kind of felt for him, for how aggressive he was. And he just looked at me and said, "Why are you laughing at me?" And it was the situation, what I didn't expect. And I told Ross, and he was very friendly, and he said, "I think you're making a big mistake going up alongside Lewis." I was like, "Oh, this is awesome."
There's a vote of confidence for you.
A lot of positive energy here I'm getting. But I was leaving. But it happens. I didn't have a contract for the next year. It just didn't feel like the place for me. Going to McLaren was. And I remember walking into McLaren, and the first thing I said was, before I met anyone, I spoke to Martin Whitmarsh, I spoke to Ron Dennis, and I said, my first question is this Lewis's team? Am I going to have equal treatment here? Because if I'm not, I don't want to be here. Yeah. And they said, yes, everything will be 100% equal between both of the drivers. And I was like, right, now I can start. And then I walked in, met everyone, and got a pretty good rapport with the team very, very quickly. And my dad would walk in, and my dad was always in the background, as you know, and he would speak to the engineers, and he'd be the races. He'd be like, "Good job, guys! You've done a fantastic job. Thanks for looking after my son. Now don't mess it up."
Is that right?
I was going to say a bad word then, but don't mess it up. He would say it in a different way than that. But
and you think that had an impact?
Definitely. It was quite a cold atmosphere, and he made it a lot more friendly. Yeah. And my manager Richard was great. My physio, Mikey Muscles, my PR man, James Williamson. And I think it made everyone a bit more relaxed in the team. And drivers weren't these alien people that you can't talk to within a team. You know, I made sure that I spent time with the mechanics, time with the engineers, and really got them on side so they would listen to what I needed to do with the car to make it work for me. And that's why in those mixed conditions I could drive it well, because I developed the car around myself.
So would you tell us a little bit about your father and his influence on Jenson, and also as well contrast it with the role of your mum? It seems quite of a yin and yang approach to parenting.
Well, they're very yin and yang as people. I don't understand how they were ever together, my parents. But they weren't together very long after they had me. But my parents split up when I was 7, and I started racing when I was 8. So it was through my parents splitting up that I started racing, because my father had me on the weekends. And as a kid that wasn't really into ball sports, he's like, what am I going to do with him? So he bought me a go-kart, used all the money he had in his bank account for a go-kart, and we'd go racing on the weekends. But my dad was always there for me when it came to racing, and he would support me all the way, but he wasn't pushy. I hate that when you see dads in karting pushing their kids, because it makes you not want to do it.
Yeah.
You know, he would always say, we had a bad weekend, which we would have had, especially when I turned into a teenager. You know, you suddenly find the opposite sex attractive, and racing kind of is on the back burner a little bit. And he would turn around to me and say, Jenson, if you're not into it right now, he said, we can take a break, or if you want to stop, stop.
And what was your reaction when he would say something like that to you?
It'd make me want to work harder. There was one moment that I get emotional probably saying it, but I was karting, and I was 12, 13, and had a really bad weekend. We're racing up in Scotland, karting, and I think I finished last in every race, and I'd gone from winning the previous season to finishing last. And on the way home, he thought I was asleep in the back, and he was talking to my stepmom, and he said to her, I don't think he's got it. And that was like, that hurt. And I didn't tell him that I knew until I won the World Championship.
And what was his reaction then?
He started crying.
Oh, wow. And do you think that he knew you were hearing him, or he sort of understood you enough to know the right things to say to push your buttons?
He did. But he was a very caring guy, so he would never say anything to try and sway what I was feeling. Yeah. No, to benefit him, if you like. He would never do that. So.
And what about the role of your mother then? What did she offer you that you were still using when you were becoming a world champion?
Well, when I started racing, it's when my parents split up, and they didn't get on at all. They hated each other, which obviously was a tricky one for me, because I wanted to go driving go-karts the whole time as a kid. So she didn't like that I was driving karts. And I get it, for a mum, it's a baby boy, as the only boy in the family, got 3 sisters. And I was away with my dad having fun, but also she didn't really understand it. So she's like, it's really dangerous, he could hurt himself. And it is, has got danger attached to it. So I kind of get it, and she tried to stop me racing initially. And then she saw how much I loved it, and how well I was doing, and then I went to Europe and raced, and she was massively supportive, and she actually, apologized for me for being the way that she was. And she's been so supportive. She hasn't been at all the races, my F1 races, like my dad was. And one of the reasons was because they didn't get on, and it just didn't work for me having them both there. I didn't want to be worrying about how my mum was feeling about my dad being there, and vice versa. So because my dad got me into racing, he was always the one at the races. Yeah. But my mum watched every single race. She's even texting me now saying, when are you going up the hill next? Because she's watching it on TV. And, I don't see my mum as often as I would like, because COVID restrictions, and I live in America. But she's texting me the whole time, when are you next on TV? When are you next on, covering covering Formula One, or when you're driving a car up the hill? It's mega that she's still like that. So she's been massively supportive, and I think for my parents, obviously my dad wasn't around anymore when I retired from F1, but I think it really hit my mum when I wasn't racing in F1, because she loved that. And I think if my dad was around, I think it would have hit him really hard when I retired from F1, because that was his life.
So what lessons did they teach you that you would pass on to your children now then?
I think the supportive role, but not being pushy, with my dad. He also, even, the year that I won the World Championship, he'd be in the back of the garage, and he would wait to be spoken to, if you like. If I had an issue or I was happy, I would walk up to him. And and then I would talk to him, and then he would give me his opinion. He would never throw it at me because he knew I knew what I was doing. He was very supportive, but in a quiet way, in a very calm manner. I remember the only time he got angry with me was 2013. I broke my hand, which not many people know, punching a drum in a shop bar in Tokyo. Yes.
What did the drum do that was so offensive to
Well, basically, we flew from Korea,
Yeah.
which was always an interesting weekend. Flew to Japan, a lot of the drivers together. There was 12 of us in total. Went to this shop bar, and it was the weekend before the Japanese Grand Prix. So we all went out, had a few drinks, and to get everyone around in the bar, you hit this drum with a drumstick, and the drumstick was missing. So I punched the drum, which was fine because it moved out the way. And then Felipe Massa grabbed hold of the drum and said, "Punch it again." And I did, and went over on my left knuckle because I didn't know what I was doing, and broke my hand. And DC was there, and I mean DC couldn't really see at that point, but he still looked at me, went, "You've broken it, haven't you?" And he knew immediately, and I was like, "Yeah." And it got me ice, and went to the doctors the next day, and I'd broken my hand, and they said, "You got to strap it up. We've got to put a cast on it." So I'm driving a Formula One car in 3 days. I can't do that. They said, "Well, it's going to hurt a lot then." I eventually raced in Japan. The team wanted to swap me out and put the young gun in, which was it Checo? No, it was...
Van Dorn?
No, it wasn't. It was Kevin Magnussen.
Okay, Magnussen, yeah.
They wanted to put him in the car so they could compare him and Checo to see who would be in the car the next year. And I was like, no, I'm not getting out the car. So I drove, and I basically had to strap my hand to the steering wheel to drive. That's the only time he got angry at me, when I told him I broke my hand. He said a really bad word to me, which I'm not going to mention
Do
now.
not repeat that.
Well, on a podcast we can, right? But there's people here, so we
That's
can't.
the problem. That's the problem.
We've got to be careful. But he was really angry. It's the only time in my racing career he's been angry with me, just because of my stupidity. No, getting back to your question, I think it's the nurturing. You know, I see it as a father. You know, with my kids, I want to nurture them, and I don't want to push them in any direction. If my son or my daughter want to race cars or go-karts, it's funny, when you race karts, you don't say go-karts, but when you retire from karts, you say go-karts. If they want to race karts, I'm going to let them. But I'm not going to push them to do that at all. But I have a feeling my son, Hendrix, is going to want to, because all day long he plays with cars, right. You know, and he carries cars around with him. So it looks like he's going to be a car collector, which is going to be expensive. But if he wants to do it, he wants to do it, and I'll let him. But I think I'm lucky because he's going to be your size.
Is he?
And we've all seen you drive cars.
Very fast. Very impressive.
Yeah.
Let's talk about failure and allowing your kids to fail, because I think one of the big issues these days is like this helicopter parenting, hovering around your kids all the time, smoothing the path in front of them, not allowing them to fail, and then they get to an age and they don't have the resilience because they've never had to fail before. Loads of parents listen to this podcast. So, you know, you've gone through a whole life of failure. That's the reality of an elite sports person, right? Regular failure and then the odd success. What are you going to be teaching them about the power of failure? Will you let them fail?
I agree, and sometimes I am a helicopter parent because I don't want my son to hurt himself. But in terms of failing, yeah, he has to. And, you know, as long as you're there to pick him up after and tell him this happens, you know, we've all been through it. You know, I went through really tough times, and it's having that network of people around you that really helps. You know, not to blow smoke up your backside, but to tell you what you can do and to remind you of what you've achieved in the past and how hard you've worked for this. And Formula One is a mental game. You know, pretty much every guy on the grid is super talented. Yeah. It's just if their head is in the right space. Pierre Gasly jumps in a Red Bull, gets annihilated in a Red Bull, jumps back in the Alpha Tower as it is now, and look at him. Yeah. I mean, he's outperforming so many of these top drivers on the grid because his head's in the right place. And the people around him are helping him achieve because they're putting him in that right headspace. So
can you share with us some of those tips that you use to get yourself in that headspace to go out there and perform at your best?
For me, it was, I was terrible at if I had a bad weekend. I wouldn't go through the process of working out why it was bad. It would just live with me for days. And that was a big issue for me in my earlier career, sort of 2001, 2002, and that's why I struggled at Benetton so much. I had a boss like Flavio Briatore that would pick every fault and tell the world of your issues and wouldn't be there to help you through them. So I would, Sunday, bad weekend, and I would think about that race all the way up until the next race, and that really hurt me, and it just got worse and worse and worse. So I had to really work on, and I didn't work with a specialist, which I should have done because it took me longer to learn, but I had to get out the car, sit down with my thoughts, and even write it down on a piece of paper, the reasons why it didn't work that day. And this is just with myself, not with other people. The reasons why it didn't work that day and how to make this better, because I know I can drive a racing car against the best in the world, but I'm not performing, and why is that? And I had to write things down and work out the issues. Was it because I was staring at a TV screen before I went out for my quali lap, which it was? Right. Was it because my head wasn't in the right place when it came to fitness, nutrition, working with the engineers? And I really had to work out the reasons for it. And I would do that straight after the race, before I've talked to anyone. And that, for me, was the most important thing. Write it down, put it in my pocket, and that was the quickest way for me to get over a bad weekend and develop my skills in the areas that I was weak. Because we all have weaknesses. And every driver, every sportsman has a weakness, and it's those areas you really need to work on.
And what did it do for you when you finally got that first Formula One win? I mean, we all remember, I'm sure, that amazing image of you with your wide eyes and the visor up on your helmet. That almost looked like a kind of a disbelief or a realization that finally the win has come. What did that do for your confidence and your approach to racing?
Formula One is a team sport, and you can't win without a good car, you can't win without a good team, but you also can't win without a good driver. So that weekend was a pretty emotional weekend because we had a great car that weekend in Hungary, 2006. And Honda back then were very good with power output, but the reliability wasn't there. And I was in practice, I was super quick, but we blew the engine on Saturday morning. Went into qualifying, I qualified fourth, which I'm pretty happy with. But back then you had a 10-place grid penalty for an engine failure, so I started the race 14th. So coming through in those tricky conditions and winning in that manner was massive for us. You know, the adrenaline, it's always exciting when you come through a field and win a race, right? And it's great to watch. And I think that just added to the excitement for the whole team. And I've never seen so many grown men cry. You know, the Japanese, Freudian there, the Japanese were so emotional about their motor racing. And to finally get that win after so many years of trying really meant a lot to them. And also the UK-based team as well. But a really special weekend. And the funny thing is, you celebrate and then it's forgotten.
So did you not feel any different the following race? Did
No.
you not go into that with more confidence or more belief? No?
Not at all. I think as a whole, as a team, we probably did. You know, we were more confident turning up at the next race when it came to strategy and the pit stops the guys were doing. I think there was more belief in us as a team, probably, than us as individuals. So that was where it helped us. And if you looked at that point to the end of the season, we actually scored more points than Michael Schumacher, Fernando Alonso, the two guys that were fighting for the World Championship. So it definitely helped us as a team have confidence to go out there and fight with the best of them.
So what would you say were the biggest changes then from the you that won it in 2006 to the guy in 2001 that was struggling to process these defeats?
Definitely understanding motor racing. You know, we jump into an F1 car and think, well, I know I can drive, I'm gonna win. But it doesn't quite work like that. You know, you're racing against everyone. All these drivers have been through the same process as you of coming through lower categories and winning. So you think you're going to be the best when you get into an F1 car, but you're racing against the best. They're all fantastic drivers. And I had Kevin Magnussen as a teammate back in 2014, and I remember at race 3, he turned around to me and said, JB, I didn't know it was going to be this hard. I thought I'd jump in and just destroy you all. Yeah. But it doesn't happen. You're racing against the best. And for me, it was understanding that your natural ability is never enough. There's always someone that has got a slightly better natural ability. It's about working on the areas, for example, the engineering, and as I was mentioning before, the fitness, the nutrition, and mentally feeling like you're doing more than everyone else. I think that gives you a bit of confidence as well. You know, my fitness, I always tried to be fitter every year I raced in F1, and I felt like I was the fittest F1 driver. Whether I was or not, I don't know. Nutrition, I always thought I was doing a better job with nutrition, with the engineering and understanding of the car, not just coming in and saying, it's understeering here, it's oversteering here, but actually understanding what I need to do with the car to make it feel better, not just giving it to the engineers and say, here you go, sort that out, I'll come back tomorrow. So for me, that was the most important thing, understanding Formula One, really, rather than just using my natural ability to win.
And how much did perception, external perception, frustrate you? Because you were doing all this, you were giving it your everything. There was so much dependent upon the chassis that had been built or the engine that had been created. You're giving it everything, you're going to the nth degree to be perfect. Yet I remember in the early career, it was like, oh, Jenson Button, he's the playboy guy who just likes a night out. He hasn't won a race yet. You remember that conversation that swirled around at the time? Did you allow that to frustrate you? Did you try and get control of that? Because external perception impacts people too much, you know?
It does, and it started with Flavio basically saying it in Monaco.
Right.
I finished 7th, which then was not point scoring. Now a 7th is amazing, right, in F1, but it was 7th and I was just outside the points. And our power steering failed at the start of the race, and F1 cars are pretty heavy without power steering, and I had blisters all over my hands, and came in, and Flavio gave an interview without talking to me and said, I think he was looking for a new apartment or a new yacht to buy. That's why he finished 7th, and our hands were bleeding. So that really hurt, your own boss, the guy that's supposed to be nurturing you, saying that to the press, and then they obviously take that on board and they run with it forever, basically.
But did you speak to Flavio and try and explain to him how that's not helpful?
He wasn't the sort of guy you could sit down with and have an honest conversation like that. So it was very tricky. And I needed other people in the team to support me, and they didn't really. This is a team that had achieved a lot in the past with Michael Schumacher, and they thought they were the best. And this young kid, who they think now is a playboy because Flavio said it, is coming in here trying to perform, and he's not doing a good enough job. And I wasn't doing a good enough job. It's because I wasn't being nurtured in the right way, and I wasn't mentally strong enough to find a way out.
So beyond being hurt by that comment by Flavio, how else did that affect you, that perception?
Yeah, it did. And, I had a girlfriend at the time as well. I had a long-term girlfriend I'd been with for 3 years, so Playboy doesn't really fit. It really did hurt. And I'm quite an emotional character anyway. I'm not hard in any way when it comes to emotion. So you definitely become a little bit harder through your years in F1. But I really struggled with that, and that was one of the biggest issues for me. And the best thing for me was to leave the team. And I was told to leave the team because Fernando was coming in anyway. So it's like, okay, right, where am I going to go? And Dave Richards gave me the opportunity to go to BAR, and it was the best move of my life. That team walked in, high-fiving everyone on the way in. They were really happy for me to be there. And, to feel wanted was immediately, it was a complete switch for me. And jumped in the car, felt great. The only person that didn't want me to be there was Jacques Villeneuve, my teammate. But we all know how that turned out. But we ended up being good friends. But that was such a good step for me. And sometimes that's all it needs for a driver. It's that shift, that change in team and team mentality. And it's very different to most sports. Most sports it's the individual, and it's the fitness level, it's the technical understanding of the sport. But team sports are tough, and I understand that in football, in rugby. Sometimes you just don't click with that crowd of people you're working with, and sometimes it's difficult to find that. And I found that with BAR, and it was great working with that team through it being BAR, Honda, and then on to being Brawn.
So what was the team where you felt you were at your happiest and therefore performed at your best?
I had 2 teams that I was with for a long period of time, and probably the most happy was still BAR. Which turned into Brawn. It just felt like family to me. And I also, because we went from kind of nothing, 4th place was our best finish, I think, in 2003, to winning the World Championship together and winning, having our first victory together as a team. So that, for me, was probably the team that stands out as the biggest family that I've worked with. McLaren was different because I arrived there as a world champion and had won races. But still, they welcomed me like I didn't expect them to, as they had Lewis as their number 1 driver, if you like. So both fantastic teams to work with, very different bosses, with Ron Dennis at the helm at McLaren. And, I really liked working with Ron. Unusual character, sometimes tricky. Yeah, you know, having a conversation with Ron one-to-one could be tricky.
Yeah.
But it could be awesome as well. It could be really great, you know, getting his opinion on things. And he's been around the sport for many years. What with Alan Prost, Ayrton Senna, and, you know, trying to control those two drivers under one roof. I can't imagine how difficult it was. So it was really nice working with him. But to be fair, it was more like Martin Whitmarsh that I could work with on a day-to-day basis and felt, you know, making the team feel like my own was with Martin and the engineers.
So why was it tricky with Ron?
He's just an unusual character. If you've ever spoken to Ron, you probably know. You've probably interviewed Ron.
Tried to.
Yeah, exactly. On his day, Ron was great being interviewed, but the next day would be really difficult. So he was very passionate about Formula One. He wanted it to be a certain way, but it wasn't always that way, so it'd be tricky. But he built this team from very small.
Yeah.
So he achieved so much with McLaren, and without him, it wouldn't exist. So it was really sad to see him go. And after a couple of sherbets, it was always a lot of fun. A couple of lemonades, and you can hit, you know, the true stories and the great stories.
The good
came
stories.
out. Exactly.
So you saw kind of really different cultures then as you moved through Formula One, and we'll talk about the championship-winning season in just a moment. But now that you're involved in Extreme E, you've got your own team there, you're a parent as well. Lots of CEOs listen to this podcast. What do you believe makes a healthy culture? Like, what do you want to see in a team that you're involved in?
I think from both sides, I think healthy criticism is really important. And it's giving it and it's taking it. It's giving it in the right way, not putting people down. And I found that in Extreme E, because as a driver, I'm coming in and it's something that's completely different. I have no idea what I'm doing driving an Extreme E car.
Yeah.
So I have to be open to criticism. And that is key for me, being open to that positive criticism and learning from it. You know, my teammate, Michaela, she is an extraordinary driver on track, but for her it's the same. You know, driving an off-road vehicle is completely new, and I must say I've never seen a driver learn as quickly as she has, because she studies the data and she goes about in her own way. You know, she fully focuses and goes through the whole process of driving the vehicle. I watch her and I think it's hilarious to watch, but she goes out there and the next run she's 10 times better than she was before. So I think positive criticism, giving it and receiving it is really key. Wanting to learn, wanting to be better than you were yesterday. And if you're not better the next day, you're not better. Yeah. But you've tried, and that's the main thing. It's putting in the effort to always want to be better than you were yesterday. And some days are going to be dark, and some days are going to be difficult. But you've got to realize that we've all been through that, and it's how you deal with that, and not be afraid to ask for help in that situation. You know, and I wasn't that person. I bottled it up inside, and it really hurt my career in the early stages of my F1 career. So it's being open to criticism, but also being open to asking for help.
So what were the benefits then? I mean, that's a really intriguing comment that you made about bottling up emotions or judgments. What was the catalyst that led you to understand that starting to ask for feedback and be open to it was healthy? It
was people coming to me and asking if I needed help in that situation. You know, my physio...
Were you initially reticent towards that? Did you feel it was a weakness at the beginning? Yeah.
Totally. And I would never want to speak to a specialist and try and help me in that situation. You know, I think as Brits, we're not very good at asking for help either. You know, couples therapy, I mean, why would you want that? We can deal with it ourselves. But you're not being told what to do as a human being. It's someone sitting there and you're just airing your issues. They don't comment on anything. They don't give you feedback. It's more just having someone that you can just release everything. And it's just it's a weight off your shoulders. And no, I haven't been to couple counselling, but just I would if I had to. I definitely would be open to it. And I'm dating an American, so she's totally up for it. But I mean, in terms of couple counselling. Anyway, but yes, I'm totally off subject. I'm completely lost now after that comment.
No problem. But we know what you meant. By the time 2009 arrived, right? This is the title-winning season. Then, were you at that point dealing with not necessarily a psychologist, but you were able to talk a lot more openly? And I wonder whether that helped, because, as I mentioned to you just beforehand, I mean, my memory of 2009 is seeing that car so fast in Australia, seeing real confidence from you and Rubens. And was it in Australia Rubens had a bit of a shunt at the beginning and the car hardly got damaged and it looked like a bulletproof Formula One car.
Yeah, turn one, he had a bit of a touch.
Right.
He had a bad start, didn't he, and had a bit
Yeah.
of a touch.
And it was amazing, and you were just on the crest of a wave. And then, I don't know whether you have any memory of this, but Nicola was the press officer at Brawn. Is that right?
Nicola, yeah.
And I came to interview you in Italy, in the paddock. And as we were walking to the motorhome, and I mean, that would have been 2/3 of the way through the season, she said, look, just to say, it's been half a few races. His head's in a strange space, okay? So we'll just see how it goes. I was like, okay. And you were like, I have to say, you were the friendliest, kindest, most open, brilliant Formula One driver that any of us dealt with in our time in Formula One, because you, like now, you were just you. I came in the room, you didn't even look at me, you didn't really want to do an interview, if I'm being totally honest. You gave me 2-word answers, and it might have gone on the telly, but I think we just filled it with shots of you racing and the odd answer. What was going on at that point?
It was difficult. It was like my whole career in one season. Do you know what I mean? Through the emotions. And yeah, I'd learned from those tough years, but finally I'm in a position where I can win races, I can fight for a championship. And it was a brand new team, if you like, that you didn't know where the future was going to be. So you had to take the opportunity to win the championship that year, which is lucky that we did. So I put so much pressure on myself, and pressure that I shouldn't have put on my shoulders, because the car was good, the team were good, and I was performing well. As soon as I had one bad race, which was Silverstone, the first of the bad races, being at home, I wanted to have a great race in front of the home crowd. Circuit I loved, and it was so cold, and I was quite famous for not being able to get tire temperature, and I really struggled that race, and I think I finished 6th after winning the first 6 to 7 races. And that really hurt me, and I didn't immediately ask for help or discuss it with anyone. It went through quite a few races, and this is when we had our bad interview, I'm sure. And then my physio, Mikey Muscles, who I'd been with for many years before that, while he was giving me a little rub on the table, he said, JB, just talk to me. He said, just talk to me. Just let it all out. And it was the best thing that he could have said. And I did. And I just told him how I felt.
Can you reveal a bit of what you said?
I was just saying, this could be my only chance, and I've put so much pressure on myself, and every time I don't perform, whether it's in a practice lap or a qualifying lap or a lap in the race, I feel the pressure building within. But then I also look at what they write, because the headlines are always tough for a sportsman to read, and nobody takes credit for the headline. They'll take credit for the article, and they'll say, oh, the headline wasn't me.
Yeah.
And the headlines are always the one that hit you the hardest when it's negative. So I was reading way too much. I would love it when they write positive stuff, of course, and I read everything, and then suddenly they're writing negative stuff, and I couldn't help myself from reading it. And that really took its toll. And being open with Mikey was really key to let everything out, relax, and then just get on with my job. And I remember getting asked by a British journalist in Spa, and I was quick in Spa, but I crashed at the start of the race. It was Roman Grosjean tapped me in the rear, and I crashed actually with Lewis at the time. And I came in, and he said, Jenson, it's like you don't want to win this world championship. And it was just the most stupid question, the most stupid comment, and I basically just told him to leave.
Yeah.
And everyone else did as well, all the other journalists. But that was when it was at its lowest point. But after that, as I said, I spoke to Mikey, and I came out feeling a lot fresher. We'd spend more time with fitness, just getting away from stuff over the race weekends, not focusing too much on looking at a timing screen over practice sessions and stuff like that. So getting away from it so I could come back and felt a lot more fresh when I jumped in the car. And I definitely felt it when I was racing. I felt more alive. I felt like that young kid again that just jumped into an F1 car with Williams. I felt like that again, and I kind of forgot about the championship and just took every race as it came.
And if I remembered it right, that in Brazil, when you won the world title, where did you qualify for that race?
14th.
And you had to finish, 5th or 6th or something?
Yeah, my teammate qualified on pole. We as a team, made the wrong choice on tyres in qualifying. We went on the Inter, and we should have been on the wet. And Vettel did exactly the same thing, because they were basically copying us.
Right.
And he was my closest rival, really. And he started 16th. So we didn't have the car really that was quick enough compared to the Red Bull or the McLaren, but I knew I had to finish in the top 5. And, it was tough because my teammate qualified on pole. He was Brazilian. I remember going to restaurants in Brazil and them putting a ladder outside the front door, so I had to walk under it to give me bad
Love
luck.
it.
And
Marginal gains.
Exactly.
But then didn't you turn up on that race day like with real serenity?
yeah, I had a pint the night before a race, which I probably wasn't supposed to do. But I had a pint in the hotel bar with my dad, and I just looked at him and I said, I'm going to win the World Championship tomorrow. I have to win the World Championship tomorrow before the last race of the season. And he just looked at me and nodded. And woke up the next day, refreshed, walked into the team, and they're like, oh, okay. And had a great race, one of the best races of my life, fighting through. And the car was obviously working well, but fighting through. And all the time on the radio, it's like, where are we? Where's Lewis? Where's Sebastian? Where do we need to be? And having as much information as possible, how hard I should push, how brave I had to be on the moves of overtaking people, because a lot of them were like close calls. Crossing that finish line, it was a very special and emotional moment. Doing it that way, for me, it felt that race, the highs and the lows of that race weekend was my whole career in 2 days.
So it sounds like you discovered almost a winning formula to handle pressure. So what tips and advice would you give to anyone listening to this about how they can handle pressure in their own lives? Yeah,
I think it's being open, as I said, not being afraid to show a weakness to the people around you, because they're the people that you're going to need when times are tough. Surrounding yourself with good people. I was very lucky. I had my old boy, I had my manager, I had Mikey Muscles, my mates, Richie and Chrissy, who were at pretty much every race, and they're racing drivers. I've raced with them since I was 8. So having good people around you that, just to let you know what you have achieved and how good you are, but without, as I said, blowing smoke up where the sun doesn't shine. But that was really important to me, having a good team of people. Being alone, I would have struggled. And I know other drivers struggled like that. I know Lewis, when we were teammates, 2011, he struggled because he didn't have that team of people around me. And that is what helped me a lot in my career.
But it also sounded like your answer echoed one of our previous guests, was Johnny Wilkinson, that spoke about he realised how much he was living in the future, and he learnt the key to it was living in the present and just focusing on the moment. How much of that was consistent with you?
We all look too much to the future, don't we? We're all looking at what we're going to do next. And living in the moment is key. And there are times when we need to look at the past, especially when it's about achievements. But you do need to live in the moment. And once the race is over, as I said, for me to write everything down, write down my weaknesses, why it didn't work for me in that situation, and then go over it in my head and then put a line through it and move on. And that was really important for me to really live in the moment, as you said, because I was thinking too much of the past and thinking how much the past was going to hurt my future, if you like.
And I think there's a great lesson from this whole conversation, which we're nearly out of time with. We all exist looking at other people, particularly now with the advent of social media, and we imagine everyone else's life is so easy. And all of us in this room would have looked at you over those years and thought, what a blessed existence. He gets up, gets on a private jet, goes to a race, races with a big smile on his face, has a drink, and then goes back to his lovely apartment.
And they'd be right.
Yeah, but they don't take into account the writing things down, the struggles, the failures. I know you had anxiety attacks at times during your career as well. This is a great reminder for everyone. Just don't assume everyone else is just living that life of serenity.
Yeah, I mean, what you see on TV is what you try and portray as an individual. And I always wanted to be the smiley guy because that's what I should be, right? I'm driving an F1 car. It's the best job in the world. And it was, but it comes with an immense amount of pressure. One, that you put yourself under a lot of pressure, but the team does, the journalists, everyone. Every slip up is on TV for the world to see. And having your life under a microscope is really tough. And you didn't get into motorsport wanting that. You didn't want to be a celebrity. You wanted to be a sportsman and achieve in Formula One. It's not like a singer or an actor that needs the public behind them to actually achieve in this sport. We love having support because it's amazing. But when they write negatives about you, it's really, really tough, and it does get you down. And I understand a lot of drivers have been through the same. And I would say have someone at every race with you that you can sit down and talk to face, even if they're not saying anything. It's just getting it out. And I think drivers these days should have that support. And looking back, I would have, but I thought I was too much of a man to have support and. Yeah, but you do at this level of the pinnacle of any sport. You need that support.
It's great advice. And now you're in this world, which is very different. You've got 2 children. You're doing all kinds of different exciting projects, including working with Lotus and Leger as well. What do you do now to kind of keep that adrenaline going? Like, what gets you out of bed in the mornings these days?
That's a very good question. And you know, when I stopped racing in F1, I raced in Japan for a couple of years, which was great. And then I stopped racing in Japan, and for 6 months, it was like, oh, this is nice, you know, relaxing, and oh, we're having children now. It's going to be really hectic. But I kind of struggled with what am I going to do next? To something that was going to give me that adrenaline, that excitement to build something really. And I struggled. You know, I was working with sponsors, which was great, and obviously working with TV, Sky Sports. But I didn't have that thing to sink my teeth into that I could really make a big change. And then I spoke to a good friend, Ant Anstead, and Mark Stubbs, who's a car designer, and we came up with the idea to take over Radford Coach Building. And that's what I've been doing the last year or so, working with those guys, working on a TV series, but also working on developing these wonderful coach-built cars. And I'm basically the drive part of it. I'm the test driver, so I'm building something that I would love to drive every day. And I think if I can do that, if I can develop something that works for me, I think it works for everyone. That was my big strength really in motor racing, is developing a car that would really work for me. So I'm loving it. It's such a fun project, and we're working with Lotus on the first car. They've been fantastic, working with our engineers and using their chassis to develop our coach-built body for it, and interior and what have you. So it's awesome, and we're announcing our first car later this year, or launching our first car later this year, which should be fun. But along with that, yeah, there's a lot going on. Working with Lotus, also with our cycle brand, Leger, and also building bikes together. Extreme E.
So you're busy.
Yeah, Extreme E. Working with Lotus again, with Lotus Engineering on learning a lot about electric vehicles and how we can develop it for the future. And the Extreme E team's doing really well. Much better when I'm not driving it, I find. So I've got to decide at the next race what I'm going to do. But great team of people, and we're third in the championship. Funnily enough, behind one ex-F1 world champion and behind the current F1 world champion. So yeah, Lewis's team is second in the championship, I think, and Nico's team is first. So yeah,
keep on their tail.
Yes.
Listen, we always end with some quickfire questions on the High Performance Podcast. And the first one is, for you and the teams that you're building and the projects you're involved in now, what would you say are the 3 non-negotiable behaviours that people have to bring to the table based on all the years of experience that we've just spent the time talking about?
Yeah, I think what we've mentioned already. One is, wanting to learn, wanting to be a better you.
Yeah.
I think taking on positive criticism is really key, and doing something you love.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't all have that opportunity. I know that in life, but if you do get the opportunity to go after something you love, it's going to be the best you. So
what advice would you give to a teenage Jenson just starting out?
It's the same thing, really. It's being very open, listening to all the everything that comes at you from all the greats from around the world. Through my career, there were so many great F1 drivers that came to me and gave me their opinion on not just my driving, but who I should be working with in F1, and also the experiences that they went through. And they said, you're probably going to go through this emotion one day. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to go through that. It's never going to be hard. But it happens to all of us. So take it on board. Take all the information from these greats on board. Whatever it is, whatever you do as a job, someone has been through it before you. So take it all on board.
And talking of taking things on board, what would you recommend as either a book or a podcast or something for people to listen to that has spoken to you? One
for me was, because I love triathlons as well, love Ironman and the mental game of an Ironman, because, it's an endurance sport. Physical is important, but it's also what your head goes through those 8 hours of an Ironman. Yeah. So for me, Iron War is a great book. Dave Scott, Mark Allen, 2 of the greatest triathletes in the world at that moment. This is a long time. It's a few decades ago now. Yeah. But they were coming. They'd been racing on the swim, the bike, head to head the whole way. But the run was the one that was filmed, and they're in shot pretty much the whole run, running side by side, and one would take one bigger step than the other. And you just see the mental game with them. It's hurting, the pain on their faces, but they're not giving up because the other guy is next to them and has pushed on that little bit more. And they're trying to hide the pain, so the other guy can't see it, but it's coming through, and it's just awesome to watch that fight between two greats. And you know the emotion, the physical stress, the mental stress that they're going through at that moment in time. And it's, I mean, I've seen it on YouTube, but also, you know, you can read the book. Great book.
So what's your greatest strength and your greatest weakness?
My greatest weakness was that I wasn't willing to move on from a bad weekend, but I feel that I've definitely got over that. Greatest weakness, I think one thing that I've not been able to get over is driving a bad car. You know, that's my weakness. You know, Fernando Alonso can jump in a bad car and get more out of it than I can. I don't like oversteer, which is funny that I'm racing off-road vehicles. But you know, that's probably my weakness. Strength is the way I drive is very different to most. For example, Lewis comes into a corner. It's great because I have all the speed traces and everything from the data when we were teammates, but hammers the brake, you know, as hard as he can. There's no modulation. Turns into the corner, goes on the throttle. The same amount of pressure every time. It's linear, and he does everything through the steering wheel. Whereas I was the complete opposite. I would brake and modulate it, well, that's to stop front locking. And I would come on the throttle and modulate the throttle so that I didn't have to change my steering angle. So I'd be smooth in the steering. They'd say, oh, it looks so smooth. It's just because that's what I would use, very differently than someone like Lewis. So that hurt me in some ways, but it helped me in those mixed conditions, really feel the condition underneath me. So modulating the brake, when you come into braking, you're not going to be locking up as much. You don't want steering angle in the wet because it's very easy to lose the rear, and modulating the throttle is key as well because it controls that. And you know, I feel that I felt the car through my bum a lot more than others. A lot of people would see it's wet and drive to what they see, whereas I would drive to what I felt. And that's where my strength was in those mixed conditions. And half my victories were in F1 were in mixed conditions. So I'm not saying I like those conditions. No one likes it, but I just did better than others. So.
Very good. And look, the final question, really, and it's kind of a last message from you to the listeners of the podcast. What is your one golden rule, your one message you'd like to leave with them that you've learned over the years for living a high-performance life?
It's going to be bloody hard.
But that's not a bad thing. What's hard isn't necessarily bad, right?
It isn't. You're going to have a lot of failures before you actually achieve. And but it's embracing those failures. And we all say it, but learning from those failures. You know, it's difficult. It really is difficult getting over those failures, but it's learning to get over those failures. That's what's going to make you a great champion.
Brilliant. Look, thank you so much for your time and for your honesty. And despite the fact you talk about all those moments of failure, I can honestly say that when I was involved in F1, you were so kind of open and honest with people, and you managed to sort of carry yourself in such a dignified way. And I'm sure it was a lot to do with the people that were around you, but it's a testament to the of person you are as well.
You were there from when we won the World Championship.
Yeah.
I remember giving you a big hug in the garage.
In the garage. That was amazing.
It was hectic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't an inch between everyone in the garage. It was madness.
Because it was deadly quiet, and then all the snappers came in, and then you came in a moment afterwards, and just you had a kind of 1,000-yard stare. I mean, I guess it was just like this moment had arrived and it had happened for you, but obviously it was a pleasure to share that, and it's a pleasure to see you today and to catch up. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Formula 1 World Champion, Jenson Button.
Thank you. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, leave a review, but somehow get involved with the High Performance Podcast and become part of our growing community. Thanks for being part of the adventure.